Everybody, a couple days ago I tweeted out, has anyone gotten any practical use out of the first of types CSS selector? I got a ton of useful responses and replies, and I started to wonder, just a little curious, why I hadn't really dove into this particular CSS selector or type of CSS selector. And I think part of it is just because I use classes a lot for my markup. I don't tie my CSS as much to the tag names like the first of type and last of type and other of type CSS selectors do. But I think another part of it is just that CSS selectors are a little bit hard to visualize. For example, say we go to my website and we just type query selector all, and we type our first of type selector in there. It'll return a list of all the elements that match that selector, and we can go through and highlight them and see them rendered on the page. But it doesn't actually give us any context in terms of siblings in the code, or it doesn't tie directly to the HTML as nice as we might want to. Another way to do it is to go to the dev tools, you go to the elements panel, you can type Command F, and you can actually put a CSS selector in here. I can just type first of type here, and it will display one result at a time, so you can kind of just scroll through, which is useful, but it's not quite what I wanted, because again, you can't really see the context of everything that's being selected. So I built a proof of concept I'm calling Selector. It just uses the syntax highlighter to show some HTML on the page, and it's got a text box at the top, and you just type a CSS selector in there, and it will highlight the elements in your markup that match that selector. You can kind of see on the right here, it will show how many matches you have. It'll also give you the option to wrap the source code if you want. So this can be pretty useful, right? You can see exactly what the CSS selector is selecting on the page. You can kind of play around with it a little bit. We can use first of type, we can use last of type. And we can see that both the definition title and the definition are selected when we use this of type selector, which is pretty good, pretty useful. And another thing you can do, which is kind of useful, is you can compare two different selectors. So I have first of type here on the left. I want to compare that to first child. You can see they are pretty close, except the only difference here is this data definition element is not being selected. So let's add that in here. So we can very easily write equivalent CSS selectors and compare them to our previous. So let's look at another example. Here's a bunch of different list items not using traditional list markup. And you probably wouldn't name your classes this, but this is just a contrived example. How do you select the first element that has the other list item class on it? So remember, first of type only selects the first div in this example. We could do other list item, which would select all our divs. We could try first child. That wouldn't give us anything because that has to be the first sibling. How about not other list item? And then use the adjacent sibling selector to select the next one in the list. This gives us the very first element that contains this other list item class. Here's a little bit bigger example using a table element that I took from TableSaw, which is a responsive tables plugin. Let's try first of type here. Selects a whole bunch of stuff. Let's try our first table header. Let's try our first table data. You can kind of see here that it can be pretty useful, especially when in the case of using table markup, you wouldn't want to put a class on every single element to make it uniquely selectable. You want to use the tag names or the type selectors as much as possible. Another interesting thing here is when you look at nth child. So 2n selects every even element. And let's do this inside of table rows. So since element indexes they start with 1, the first one isn't selected, the second one is, and so on. We can replace this with even and see it's the same thing. So let's put 2n plus 1. It selects every odd element here. But kind of the neat thing is that we can just change this index and see how it moves. It really makes it easier to understand the offset that we pass to nth child. Alright, so I put this selector source code up on my GitHub. You can check it out. If you want to change the HTML that gets parsed, go into the index JavaScript and modify this line. I've also uploaded it to my website, so you can sort of play around with it without checking the source code out. Zachary.com/selectthor. But really, the kind of cool thing that I think would be super useful is if this was integrated into our code editors. So say, for example, you're on CodePen, and we have this original example here with the definition lists. What if as I was typing the selector into CodePen, it would highlight it in the HTML pane? How cool would that be? I think it'd be awesome. It might also be cool to see all of the elements that match the CSS selector highlighted in the DevTools. Alright, so that is Selectthor. Check it on my website and on my GitHub. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. Alright, thanks.